Hello and welcome to part 2 of my 3D printing journey. As you can see, I've got the printer out in the conservatory right now, and it's actually printing a dungeon tile. Apparently it's going to take about 5 hours with the high quality settings I've got. And basically I just want to talk about some of the ups and downs over the last 7 days, because basically never had a 3D printer before, got this one last weekend. Got it all assembled in kind of on and off with a few trips out to walk my sister's dogs and stuff. Yeah, about 7 hours to build, and a couple of problems, some of which I touched on in part 1. Anyway, let's get back inside. Okay, let's start off with print number 1. Yeah. As you can see, I didn't have the bed leveling quite right, and I think the bed temperature wasn't good. Plus the tape wasn't good, so there was a few issues, shall we say, with this particular print. Started going wrong, and then we ended up with spaghetti junction due to the fact that the print head was interfering with this. The other problem I discovered that I had was the fan had this little blower that comes straight out the box, and you'll notice, I don't know if you can see with this bright sunlight, let's block some of it off, see if that helps. Can you see how I've had to modify it so when it's travelling backwards and forwards it doesn't scrape on the bed? I had to trim it back with some clippers to actually get it to fit and be at a decent print height. So you might need to replace this quickly. I did. I got the circular fan that you can get off Thingiverse. I will probably try and get a screen grab of that and pop it in the video, so slight pause for effect. There you go. So hopefully you're enjoying looking at that wonderful fan blower. Now there is a problem with that as well, that can also interfere when it's moving around. I do know someone's done a remix with different heights, and you might need to fiddle with your setup to get it working. So that's the first two main problems I had, is getting the bed height and getting this blower working. Once I did that, things did start improving. So for example, I did print out a cube, which didn't quite work, but again, I think it's because the height wasn't quite right. This is actually the perimeter shield, which, you know, as you can see, for some reason I kept. Anyway, what have I been doing the rest of the week? Well, as you can see, I've been doing lots and lots of printouts and bagging stuff up. So let's move this all to one side and go through what I did. Well, the first thing I did is a load of little test prints to just check how things were going. So you probably can't see it, but let me put them out. A couple of tiny little kind of 6mm, 3mm pieces. There you go, so a couple of those bits there. And also another little tiny Cthulhu. And then the test cube, which I think we've seen already from my previous video, but if not, let me have a look. I don't know if you can see there, it's got some wispy bits, so that was sitting in the bed that I showed you earlier, this bit over here, that was sitting in there and broke it away. And it was reasonably good, but it's got some kind of wibbly lines in the side here, so bed was not quite set up properly. So I did a few more cubes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think this was the last one I did, where it was pretty much where I wanted it to be. So printed out one of these fidget things, shrunk it down so small I can't actually get the damn thing to turn. Also tried printing out a buckyball, reasonably okay, a little bit rough on the finish again, possibly shrank it down too much. So that was kind of day 1, day 2, fiddling, getting things sorted, tightening up the belts, tightening up some nuts and screws, fiddling around with the bed height. And I managed to get the bed height pretty much where I wanted it, and everything was perfect. I then changed the fan blower, which I've got actually on the printer right now, so I can't show that to you. And yeah, that mucked everything up, so I had to go through a whole load of reprinting, recalibrating, and so forth. So I actually printed out a slightly bigger version of one of those little bits I showed you earlier. I think this is still about half size. our little waving robot friend. I also tried printing out an atlas from the game BattleTech, and it looks good from this distance, but when you zoom in it's not so good. Part of the problem is kind of in here, where my thumb is, you might not be able to quite see that. There is like a mesh, so this body is totally hollow, and as such it's a little bit rough. Also the finish probably could do with quite a bit of work, so a lot of green stuff probably before this is ready to paint to be decent. Having said that, I do prefer the MechWarrior models to classic BattleTech miniatures, so it'd be nice to actually get a working printout. So the next bit I printed in great length are tentacles, and I did them in various sizes. So you've got kind of more like a true scale one, and then a whole load of little ones. And it was during this process that I actually did encounter a problem with one of the tentacles. And if I show you that, where's it gone? Oh, bags. I should remove stuff from bags before filming. Okay, yeah, so as you can see, it's missing its tip. Now I did have a small one that didn't print quite right, so I've snipped the tip off that one, and the idea is to get that glued on top here in a bit of green stuff to make this tentacle finish off nicely. So yeah, that worked quite well. From the same company, who currently has a Kickstarter going at the moment, I've managed to get a slug and some crystals, and looking forward to having a play with those. Now this is where I discovered an issue with the cheap Chinese printer. Not only did I have that broken end plate, but I also had major problems with bolts coming unscrewed on the hotbed. So for example, not only did I have a problem with the tentacle, but I also had a problem with this Buddha stopping halfway. So I did a smaller version which did manage to print out okay. The ears are not quite right at this scale, so that's the size it should be. That's the size it is, and yes, it is a Yoda Buddha. Now you'll notice here it's got like a little burn mark. The reason for that is the SD card threw an error, so the printer just stopped in place, and of course the PLA acted as a heat soak to the hot end. Luckily nothing major untoward happened. However, shortly after printing this, I had the thermostat drop out of my my hot end, which caused a load of horrible smoke to pour everywhere, and a little bit of a concern for my health basically. So I basically attached a load of cable clips to my hot head to make sure the cables didn't jiggle around and fall out again, causing absolute bedlam. So that is my top tip to you, is print out a new fan shroud to cool your part, but also make sure you use all the cable clips that come with your printer, and maybe if necessary even download and print some out. Now I do have one of those kicking around somewhere. I can't find it just now, so I'll have to see where I've put that. So having had success with Mini Buddha and partial success with Big Buddha, there you go. Now the print quality on this is actually pretty decent. If I zoom in, I don't think my camera's going to be able to focus this close. Oh, there you go. So still a little bit of problems on the ears. This was printed with no supports, by the way. The actual smoothness is actually pretty good. I'm hopeful when sprayed this won't have that 3D printed ridgeline issue that you can get. As you can see, it's 10% infill, plenty for a piece like this in my opinion, and I don't know if you can see the sort of banding issues there. Now that's a visual artifact. I can't actually feel that, so I hope that's just a purely visual with the way the Z-axis has lined up. So anyway, that's printed really well. I'm really happy with that. I might try and do a slightly bigger one. The problem with this is this took at least 5 hours to print, and that is a downside to 3D printing. It is not the quickest thing in the world. So there you go. That's all the big shiny stuff. So the last bits I printed were again from the company with the Kickstarter running. They had some kind kind of sandwormy type figures. So just printed off a few of those. And then, of course, to keep the tentacles happy, a little mini-me version. And I have to say, the quality on this miniature one is really, really good. I'm really happy with that. So with a week of tweaking, I'm getting some pretty good prints now. And from what I've seen on YouTube videos and stuff like that, the quality I'm getting out of my, I think it's £120 printer, is rivaling stuff that costs like £800, £900. Now there has been a little bit of fiddling and learning. Obviously, you've got to assemble the kit. Then you've got to kind of tweak bits and tighten bits up, etc. Anyway, the last piece I printed was this Zombicide dungeon door. Now I do have another piece of a printout, which I can't show you at the moment because it's off in sort of the painting bench area, ready to be painted. And that is the statue face for Kingdom Death Monster. So again, I'm going to try and pause for effect and maybe chuck up a photo of that so you can appreciate the wonderfulness of that. Now that print was about 7 hours. Okay, the final bit I've got to show you is basically a Dragon Lock dungeon tile. Now this has a competitor from the guys doing this. There is also a new kind of 1.5 inch tile set that's coming out, which should avoid problems with you put your figure on one tile, it takes up the entire space. But if you've got a wall on this tile, well, you've got an issue. So you're going to have to kind of span your figures across more than one tile if you've got walls on the edge. So, you know, just doing a small, 2x2 grid room with a wall around the outside, it's literally going to have to be a wall around the outside. If you put it actually on the tile, you get one figure in the room and you're done. So yeah, this is by Fat Dragon, as I say. I didn't back this on Kickstarter because at the time I didn't have a 3D print, and I really do quite like these. They print out quite nice. It'd be good to see what the new dungeon tiles look like. And I have to say, this set, as you can possibly see, has been upgraded to have the new Dragon Lock, I think it's called, system. And there's some really nice stuff coming from these guys. There's also the guys who do the really great Wargame Trainer bringing out tiles as well. I believe that's still on Indiegogo at the moment. So lots of great options for your 3D printing. I do have Hearst art molds, and I am wondering if these sort of things are going to actually rather kick Hearst art molds in the butt, because with Hearst art molds you've got to mix up your resin or plaster. You've then got to pour it, you've got to vibrate the table to get rid of air bubbles, you've then got to wait for it to cure, you've then got to pop it out. Ideally just quickly chuck it in a warm oven just to bake it off a bit, and then you've got to paint it and assemble it, and it's all a bit of a faff. Now obviously you do have a little bit of that issue with here, where you've got to wait the 3-4 hours to get your tile, but it's pretty much ready to go. So just click it together, paint it, done. So it's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of mess compared to, for example, Hearst art molds. In addition, if you're good with 3D, you could potentially click a load of these tiles together in some 3D software and just print out a room complete with hardly any assembly required. So interesting times ahead.